Before Fort Worth had a highway system, before it had an airport, before most of its suburbs even existed, there was a black town on the banks of the Trinity River that Texas history books barely mention. It outlived slavery, outlasted segregationists, and got swallowed by gravel pits and warehouses. This is the story of Mosier Valley, the first all-black community in Texas. In June 1865, word finally reached Texas that slavery was over, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. That delayed freedom is why Texans still celebrate Juneteenth. Among those newly freed were Robert and Dilsey Johnson, who had been enslaved on plantations owned by the Mosier and Lee families along the Trinity River just southeast of what's now Hearst, Euless, and Bedford.
Rather than scatter, the Johnsons and 10 other formerly enslaved families stayed. As a wedding gift, plantation owner Lucy Lee gave Robert and Dilsey 40 acres of Trinity River bottomland. Other families bought or received adjoining plots from the Mosier and Lee estates. They named their new home Mosier Valley, after the family that once owned them, but now land they owned themselves.
What grew there was a full, self-sufficient community. In 1874, residents organized Oak Grove Baptist Church, later renamed St. John Missionary Baptist Church, meeting first in the home of Frank Young. In 1883, they built their own school. By 1900, John Calhoun Parker was running a syrup mill that served the whole area, and the town had a shared schoolhouse, church, and Masonic lodge.
By its peak, between 1910 and 1930, Mosier Valley held around 300 residents, farmers, sharecroppers, handymen, and nannies who worked the surrounding white towns by day and came home to string bands, square dances, church revivals, and festivals by night. It was never counted separately in any census. Officially, in the eyes of the state, it barely existed. But it was one of the first free black towns in Texas, self-governed, self-taught, self-built. In August 1949, the Euless school superintendent decided it would be cheaper to bus Mosier Valley's 46 black students to segregated, colored schools in Fort Worth than to keep repairing their rundown one-room schoolhouse. Parents, backed by the NAACP, sued and won. A federal judge ruled that Texas law entitled the children to be educated and funded equally within their own district.
September 4, 1950, Mosier Valley parents walked 35 children to the Euless school to enroll them directly. A crowd of about 150 white residents gathered to jeer and harass them. The children were turned away. Segregation held for almost 2 more decades. The Mosier Valley School wasn't fully integrated into Hearst, Euless, Bedford schools until 1968, and the old schoolhouse finally closed.
In 1960, Fort Worth annexed Mosier Valley, not to invest in it, but to extend the city's boundary toward the planned site of what would become DFW Airport. No zoning protections came with annexation, so gravel pits, machine shops, and industrial lots moved in around family homes. Remarkably, residents didn't receive basic city services, water lines, sewer, street lights, garbage pickup, until the late 1990s, nearly 40 years after annexation. The population that once peaked near 300 has fallen to roughly 60 families. The 1924 schoolhouse was sold and moved decades ago. It's now a beauty salon in Bedford. The site of the original school sat empty for years, until the city finally began building Mosier Valley Park there, with a ceremonial groundbreaking completed in 2026 after more than a decade of community advocacy led by the Mosier Valley Community Association. The community cemetery, limited now to descendants within 4 generations, remains the last unbroken thread to the founding families.
Every Juneteenth, descendants still gather in the park to celebrate. We were here before Fort Worth, longtime residents of these freedom colonies say. And for Mosier Valley and its neighbors like Garden of Eden, Joppa, and the Bottom, that isn't an exaggeration. It's a fact the city is only now starting to put a marker on. Mosier Valley isn't a footnote in Fort Worth's history. It's older than most of the city around it. The question isn't whether this story deserves to be told. It's why it took this long.